Did you know that Max Verstappen himself blamed his team for leaving him without options at Spa? A poor decision on the RB21 setup took him off the podium, but that's not the most worrying thing. Before we continue, tell me in the comments, do you think Red Bull is losing control this season? What exactly went wrong with Verstappen's car that left him out of the top 3, and why could it happen again? In this video, we're going to analyze why Max Verstappen, with all his talent and experience, couldn't get on the podium at Spa, and what these issues reveal about Red Bull's immediate future. The team opted for a wet weather setup, which seemed prudent given the weekend's forecast. The RB21 was fitted with a high downforce aerodynamic package, including a new front wing, suspension modifications, and larger cooling inlets. The idea was clear: maximize grip in wet conditions and dominate both in race pace and stability through slow corners. But that approach failed to take into account a decisive factor. The track's evolution didn't follow the expected script. The heavy rain that marked the start of Sunday gave way to mixed conditions, with dry sections at key moments of the race, leaving Verstappen's car completely unbalanced compared to its main rivals. Most striking is that, despite the preparation and advanced data, Red Bull failed to react in time. The result was evident: a deficit in top speed that was especially noticeable on long straights like the Kemmel Straight, where Verstappen couldn't even get close to Leclerc. His performance was limited by a setup that didn't match what he ultimately found on track. And while Max's talent kept him in the top 5, the overall feeling was one of a missed opportunity, not only because of the result itself, but also because of what it revealed about the team's weaknesses in unpredictable scenarios. Red Bull arrived in Belgium with an ambitious update package. It consisted of 5 specific improvements aimed at maximizing performance in wet conditions. The team opted to install a new section on elements 1 and 2 of the front wing, seeking to generate more downforce in slow corners. The front suspension fairings were also redesigned to improve air channeling, along with enlarged side pod inlets, the function of which was to optimize engine cooling in more demanding conditions. In addition, the engine fairing and rear suspension tailpipes were adjusted to harmonize the new aerodynamic flow, which should translate into greater stability in the most technical sections of the circuit. Finally, the rear brake ducts were modified, seeking to increase downforce without compromising the car's balance. All these improvements, at least on paper, should give Verstappen a clear advantage over his rivals if the rain continued. Sunday dawned with torrential rain. Initial impressions seemed to confirm Red Bull's strategy. The race would be wet from start to finish. But after a lengthy 80-minute wait and several laps behind the safety car, conditions began to change. The track didn't dry completely, but it wasn't wet enough to justify a high downforce setup either. Simply put, the RB21 was stuck in a compromise that made it inefficient. Too much drag on the long straights and not enough benefit in corners where the asphalt was already starting to dry. The car's aerodynamic performance suffered particularly on the Kemmel Straight, one of the key sections of the Belgian track. There, Verstappen was unable to close with enough speed to attempt effective overtaking maneuvers. This left him exposed to drivers like Leclerc or even the McLarens, who ran cars more balanced for mixed conditions. Despite having good pace in certain sections of the circuit, the lack of top speed completely affected his race strategy. The most revealing thing was listening to Verstappen after the checkered flag. His words weren't those of someone who simply had a bad day. They were those of a driver who understood that the decisions made before the race robbed him of any real chance of fighting for victory. He admitted that the wing installed for the rain ended up being an obstacle. He acknowledged that the lack of speed limited him at all times. And above all, he made it clear that he never felt he was in contention for the top 3. This combination of poorly adapted technical improvements, flawed weather decisions, and a poor understanding of the track's evolution are the true key data of this Grand Prix. It wasn't just a bad result. A key part of what happened at the Belgian GP has to do not only with the car or the team strategy, but with the way the start of the race was managed. The FIA, as the highest authority in sporting matters, made a series of decisions that profoundly influenced the event's progress, and which quickly drew harsh criticism. Sunday dawned with heavy rain at Spa, leading to an immediate suspension of the start after the formation lap. What seemed like a brief delay turned into a wait that exceeded 80 minutes. During that time, the cars spun several times behind the safety car without allowing a real start under racing conditions. Most surprisingly, According to Verstappen and several other drivers, the conditions were not so extreme as to justify such a delay. For them, 1 or 2 laps behind the safety car would have been enough to disperse most of the accumulated water, improve visibility, and allow for a race in controlled wet conditions. But the FIA, maintaining an extremely conservative stance following past incidents, decided to postpone the start until the circuit was practically in intermediate conditions. The problem with this was that, at that point, many cars were already set up for a race in heavy rain, and the track no longer offered those conditions. Max Verstappen was blunt in his statements. It wasn't just a technical criticism, it was a direct complaint toward race management. He stated verbatim that it wasn't even raining heavily, and that with a couple of laps behind the safety car, the track would have been much clearer. He also questioned the criteria used to assess actual visibility, pointing out that between turns 1 and 5, conditions were perfectly manageable for an experienced driver. His words reflected not only frustration, but also distrust of the FIA's interpretation of the circuit's actual situation. From a strategic standpoint, the delay had a direct impact on Red Bull. The car was tuned for pure rain, with a high downforce wing that reduced straight-line speed but offered grip in wet conditions. The delay allowed the track to begin to partially dry, meaning the RB21 settings were no longer ideal. Adding to all this was the driver's feeling of helplessness. Verstappen isn't someone who usually complains publicly unless he feels there's something important behind it. The fact that he so clearly pointed out the errors in the FIA's decision-making and the incorrect approach to the race spoke volumes about the internal tension that existed that weekend. He stated that he never felt he was truly part of the podium fight, that his car wasn't ready for those kinds of conditions, that visibility, in his opinion, was never critical enough to justify such a lengthy neutralization. Once the race began, all assumptions turned into concrete consequences. The setup Red Bull had used for the RB21 ended up being an obstacle for Max Verstappen rather than an advantage. The car, which was tuned for heavy rain conditions, found itself in a mixed environment, with dry sections and others that were barely damp. In this context, the high downforce front wing and the aerodynamic package designed to provide additional grip began to work against it. On the straights, the drag was noticeable, leaving it vulnerable to rivals with more balanced setups. One of the most obvious effects was the loss of top speed. On a circuit like Spa, where long straights represent a crucial overtaking opportunity, this lack became decisive. Another critical factor was tire degradation. Having installed a high downforce package, the car put more pressure on the intermediate compounds, especially in sections where the track had already formed a dry lane. This thermal overload caused premature wear, and with it, a gradual loss of performance. Verstappen, usually known for his ability to manage pace and conserve tires, found himself hampered by a technical condition that neither his experience nor his aggressiveness could reverse. The car simply didn't respond as expected, and this was especially noticeable in the closing stages of the race, where its performance visibly dropped. The RB21's overall balance also left much to be desired. Although Red Bull had sought to maximize cornering grip, the result was a car that was not very agile in the transition phases between medium and high-speed corners, precisely where the asphalt was driest. The car's lack of flexibility to adapt to changing conditions was evident, and Verstappen expressed it bluntly: he never truly felt in contention for the top 3. With the race over and all the technical, strategic, and operational decisions processed, it's time for an in-depth analysis of Max Verstappen's performance at Spa and what this episode could mean for his immediate future this season. The first thing that's clear is that, despite the driver's talent, the car wasn't up to the challenge. One of the most positive points of the weekend was his performance during the sprint in pure wet conditions. In that short race, with a lighter setup and consistently wet conditions, Verstappen showed the level to which he has accustomed us. He overtook decisively, managed his tires well, and set a strong pace in tricky sectors. This shows that the car, when balanced, still has potential. But the contrast between that performance and what happened in the main race is precisely what's worrying. The difference wasn't on the track, but in the decisions made from the pit wall and in the prior interpretation of the weather data. In the internal analysis that Red Bull will have to conduct, there are key aspects that cannot be overlooked. First, The aerodynamic package designed for Spa, although ambitious, was not sufficiently adaptable. In theory, it offered greater downforce in slow corners, but in practice, it penalized straight-line performance and placed excessive stress on the tires. Second, the car failed to maintain a stable balance when conditions changed rapidly, which is vital in a season marked by unstable weather and circuits with constant transitions between dry and wet. Third, and perhaps most importantly, tactical anticipation failed. The team was left with a single reading of the weather, with no room to react to a different scenario than expected. All of this leads to an inevitable conclusion. Red Bull cannot rely solely on Verstappen's talent to resolve races. The car needs to be more versatile. The strategy must be more dynamic. As for the immediate future, the team is already working on technical adjustments that seek to refocus the balance between downforce and top speed. It's not just about modifying components, but about understanding how to adapt each package to the actual behavior of the track beyond previous data. Four-time world champion Max Verstappen finished fourth, not because of a lack of pace or his own mistakes, but because the team failed to read the conditions and adapt its car to a changing track. That fourth-place finish isn't just a statistic. It's a symptom of something deeper that, if not corrected soon, can compromise much more than a position in the standings. The race at Spa confirmed that it's not enough to have the best driver or the best aerodynamic parts. Formula One, today more than ever, rewards the ability to adapt in real time, anticipate changes, and execute precisely under pressure. Red Bull, on this occasion, failed to meet that standard. And Verstappen made that clear with his statements. And now it's your turn. Do you think Red Bull will be able to react in time? Do you think Verstappen should demand more control over the team's technical decisions, or even consider a future outside of Red Bull if these errors persist? Leave your comment, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel.